Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Well, I guess whenever, wherever you are now watching this. Are we going with podcast? I think we're going with podcast, right? Even
It's
though
a it's a podcast. It's on YouTube, but like we're working on it. It's an evolving beast.
it's a vlog. Anyways, welcome back. Thank you, like always, for joining Michael and myself. This is now podcast number 5 since we started up this summer. Vlog number 5 again, YouTube number 5, whatever you want to call it. And I think for the most part, we're actually we're enjoying it. I guess is mainly the main thing. We are getting some viewership every single week, and we appreciate all of you who are watching this. But more than anything, I think it's just Mike and I love chatting about real estate, and it gives us a chance every couple of weeks to get together and chat about real estate. So, Mike, why don't you tell everyone? Just obviously, I can see you're at the office right now.
I am at the office today. There's about probably 4 or 5 people in today. Usually we get up to about 12 that like rotate throughout the day. But it's nice here. I like the office, and I'm happy to be back.
Well, and you live farther away now.
I moved. Yeah, I'm farther away now. It's a real commute, but I feel like when you make the extra commute to get to the office, you really appreciate being there. So I'm happy. It's great here. And yeah, just to jump on what Matt said, is people are watching. We're really happy you're watching. I've had people tell me that they love the podcast, and they've shared things that we've said with management that they've talked to. So it's great that people are learning something, which is what we want.
That was the goal. Besides, again, giving us an opportunity to chat about real estate every week.
And banter about, because we used to sit across from each other, and we love to disagree with each other on market-related things and real estate-related things. So we need the opportunity to do that whenever we can create a podcast.
I'll give you credit for one thing. Eventually, you always come to my side of the argument, so I appreciate that. Okay, so just to hop in this week, the one, I guess, positive feedback, or at least consistent feedback, that Mike and I have continued to get over the last 4 episodes is we're now over 5 months into this pandemic. I would say when this first started, the general reaction from the marketplace was, let's just sit back. Let's not do anything quickly. Let's not rush any decisions. We have time on our lease. For example, I have 18 months left, and my lease expires at the end of 2021, whatever it was. We're now 5 months into this, going on to month 6. We're heading into September, which I think, again, if you would have asked most of us when this started, we would have.
Yeah, this can be over by June.
Yeah,
I'll
exactly.
Be back going to
so what we wanted, a Raptors game, seriously. What we kind of wanted to do to, I guess, give the conversation a bit of a framework today was just talk about what you need to start to do, or what you should be starting to do if your lease does kind of expire over the next 12, 18, 24 months.
Yeah, and maybe so really the idea here is you're a tenant. It's like you're a tenant. You have a lease expiry coming up in the next, call it 24 months, 36 to 48 months, or after 48 months. What should I be thinking? What should I do? How does the market context overlay this COVID? How does my workplace work?
And I think we get a little hung up sometimes on lease expiries, because it's a date. It is a finite amount of time before your lease expires. But that's not necessarily even where we're going with this conversation. Obviously, it is different right now if your lease expires in 12 months than it is if your lease expires in 72 months. We can appreciate that. But it doesn't mean that things should be looked at differently right now, just given, again, when we were going through what we wanted to chat about today and taking some of the feedback, we had to remind ourselves, one of the things I think you said to me, Mike, was, well, people are sitting out there with empty offices wondering, what can I do with that office? But again, they're not empty because they don't want people in the office. Again, we're empty because we're in a global pandemic. And I think we always have to frame the conversation by starting there. So
yeah,
we're talking about values.
Are different. And I think that's a really good point, because what we're going to talk about today is the market context. Now, if you're a company, you either are working from home and can't wait to bring people back to the office. You either are totally fine working from home and maybe you never need people to come back to the office and you're going remote, or you're somewhere in the middle. And there's going to be some maybe change to the workplace strategy in office space. What we're going to talk about is not based on that decision. We've talked about that in other podcasts of the work from home idea. So you're going to make a decision based on what your company needs and information that you guys have. What we're going to provide is, based on when you might be expiring, is what your strategy might be using what you have to do for your context to figure out what market opportunity might exist for you and what conversations you might want to have with your landlord or your broker.
Yeah, so let's start there. So let's start with people who are dealing with the most pressing issue right now, which is my lease expires somewhere in the next, want to call it 24 months?
24 months, yeah.
Okay.
If your lease is expiring in 24 months, you have to start thinking about, and I know it's hard in a pandemic, but you have to have an idea of what you're going to do at that point in time. And those discussions have to start now because it might take 6 months to a year to figure out your plan before you even hit the market.
Right. And just to give, I guess, a little bit more context to that conversation, when we're normally, I mean, it seems like normal is so long ago, but before the pandemic, when we were negotiating leases, we were looking to do them sometime between 12 to 24 months before the set expired.
So that's
that
important.
Was a renewal.
12 to 24 months on a normal market
right.
is what you're starting to enter the market, looking at options, planning your needs under normal circumstances is 12 to 24 months.
Yeah, exactly right, Mike. So let's start there. So if your lease expires in the next 12 to 24 months, again, I don't think either of us feel confident predicting where we will be with COVID in the next 12 to 24 months. I don't think either of us feel comfortable predicting how many people can be in the office by that point, if it'll be normal for people to be in the office wearing masks at that point, if it'll be normal to reconfigure offices to be cubicles to be 6 feet apart at that point. Based on what we're seeing currently, none of our clients have actually gone into their office and reconfigured space so that people could come back to the office. What we're seeing is our companies that we're dealing with, including our own, are allowing people back to the office, but those numbers have been essentially voluntary people coming back, and it's been in very low numbers.
And it's staggered, right?
And they've been able to spread out.
And you're building out.
Yeah, and they've been able to spread out, giving existing space. So, Mike, if your lease expires, let's say I'm tenant XYZ, and you're my broker. I mean, on a personal level, I think you're the best broker in the city, but just for this podcast, you're my excellent broker. What's some of the advice you're giving me right now if my lease is up in the next 12 to 24 months?
So if you're up in the next 12 to 24 months, is right now you have probably one of the best opportunities if you know what you're doing or can figure out what you're doing. If you know that you're going to be 10,000 square feet long haul because 50% of your employees are working from home and that's the number that you calculated you need, you can go out there in the marketplace and there are a ton of subleases that you can take advantage of to get the best deal that you had potentially in the past 5 or 10 years in office space and take advantage of the rates that they're paying when they signed the lease a while ago. That means you could have shorter term deals, which previously landlords were very reluctant to do. You have turnkey space where you can walk in, you don't have to put any capital in, and it's ready to go. And you can get anything from beautiful financial core spaces to brick and beam, amazing King West spaces that were never available 6 to 12 months ago. You had to, it was like the residential market where you had to bid up offers. And even if you were depending on what part of the city, especially in the suburbs, even if you didn't go to a sublease route, you can go and get a landlord to fully fund your build out and bend over backwards because landlords are scared. There's a lot of uncertainty.
What I would, just to give a little, I just want to give a little context behind that because I think that's really important what you said with the sublets. Because I think we've been saying for the last little while, sublets are coming. And the reason we say that is frankly, sublets generally come when we see economic declines, which we've seen, though it's, you can take an argument either way on what we're seeing on an economic basis. But like it or not, unemployment's higher than it has been over the last forever, a long time. So what does that mean? Generally, more sublets come to the market. So just to give some context. So in downtown Toronto right now, we're sitting at about 3.6% in terms of our vacancy level total for the downtown core. Of that 3.6%, just have to confirm this, it's slightly under 2% of that is actually sublet space. So really we're looking at anywhere, 40% to 50% of the available space on the market today is available through the sublet market. Just to give more context to that, I'm going to take us back to 2008, 2009 during the last major financial recession. We had about the same amount of sublet space on the market, just under 2%, but that was in a 9% vacant marketplace.
Right. So in terms of the subleases, way more subleases in this market than we've seen in other recessions.
Right.
And also for some context is, a lot of you probably heard this, Toronto had the lowest vacancy rate for any downtown core in North America in Q1. And then Q2 it upticked. It went from 2.1 to, what was it, 3.6?
I think 3.6, yeah.
Something like that, quarter over quarter. So we're kind of bouncing like this. We expect more subleases to come in Q3 in September, when companies start again figuring out what they're doing. Back to school season is always an active time in our market. And if you're in downtown, lots of opportunities. We've actually seen less subleases in the West End, Mississauga, Oakville area. There's been less subleases, but we just think that's a delayed effect. There's actually a lot of US companies over there, multinationals in the West market, and they just take longer to make decisions and put stuff on the market. It's coming. All to say is, you're a tenant in that window, which is the next 24 months. Figure out what you need, because if you transact from today to the next, call it 12 to 18 months from now, you are going to get the deal of the decade.
Right. And so a couple things there. You're right, in terms of the deal of the decade.
It's got a nice ring to it, Matt.
It's got a great ring to it. The decade started.
Title this podcast, Deal the Decade.
The decade started 8 months ago, and for 6 of those, we've been in a global pandemic. But you're right. I hope this will be the deal of this 2020 decade. Sorry, I just had to. I think, okay, so let's frame this. So you're right, in terms of where rents or net rents that you'll be paying, because you'll be paying that tenant's rents. They'll be much less than what the building would have been asking on a direct basis, because those rents probably got locked in somewhere between 2 to 8 years ago. So there's a huge material savings there. To your point, there's a huge material savings to the fact that that space is already built out. So you could walk in potentially the space that's finished, probably already has furniture, probably ready to go. Huge savings there, because we know for a lot of our clients right now, the thing that's actually really challenging for them is capital. What sublets don't necessarily provide is they don't provide potentially a longer term alternative. They don't necessarily provide the same amount of rights that you would get with a direct basis. But in times like these, they could be a great opportunity. I think where we should go with this, though, is looking at this deal cycle. We are now starting to see, I don't want to say clients come out of hibernation, that's not the right word, but we're now 5 to 6 months into this. Clients are finally starting to say, okay, we do need to start looking at making decisions. And again, remembering the deal cycles of we were saying before, 12 to 24 months, we're now negotiating deals that commence at this time next year. Mm-hmm. So clients are saying to us, we are starting to feel confident by this time next year, by the end of 2021, we will have more bumps in seats. We will be looking at vaccines potentially. We will be looking at potentially herd immunities. We think we're going to have more people back in the office. Because I think what we're seeing more than anything, and I think I'll keep coming back to this, people want to be in the office. Yeah. Employees want to be, to some degree, right? We've talked about this enough. It's not 9 to 5, maybe. It's not Monday to Friday. We want to be back in our offices. Employers, more than ever, as the stats continue to come out, want people back in their offices. Yeah. So we are seeing clients start to react to that. So that's if your lease expires over the next 12 to 24 months. I think you do have to start making decisions. One of those decisions is, again, let's look short term, whether that's extending the short term where we are, again, creating value of your tenancy. If we keep coming back to that, a tenant is more than just the amount of rent times square footage that they pay to the landlord every single year, right? Landlords value their buildings based on the amount of NOI, their net operating income that they receive from those buildings over the term of the lease at a cap rate well above market. I think cap rates in downtown Toronto are anywhere between 4 to 6%. So there's a huge value, incremental value to your tenancy, to any building that you're in right now. I know it doesn't feel like that over the last 5 years in Toronto, because landlords have really had the upper hand, given that we're at 2% vacancy. But there is a huge amount of value in your tenancy. I think tenants always need to keep that in their back pocket and remember that. Whether you're staying,
well, I want to use that.
Just to finish the thought, whether you're staying for 1 year right now as we work through COVID, or whether you're committing to a landlord relationship for the next 10 years, there's a huge amount of value in your tenancy besides just, hey, what space am I taking and what's my net rent? And there's a huge amount of value to the office space from your employee standpoint. So it's marrying these things together, but go ahead.
So I want to now, and that's important context, I want to move on to that next bucket of tenants.
Please.
Which are a couple
So did I.
But an important last point on that flexibility you just said is, if you have to extend, if you don't know and your lease is coming up in the next 24 months, you can extend short term. You could have done that before, and landlords will talk to you now. Or you could take on a sublease that is a short-term sublease. You can go in and there's 2.5 years left, and it helps you cheaply kick the can down the road. So that flexibility and that deal isn't just on price, but it's also on timing that now you can get today.
Really important. Okay, so switching gears. So
Next bucket.
I'm no longer XYZ tenant. I'm now ABC tenant. You tell me when my lease
You're up in
expires.
2024. You got a couple of years left.
Perfect. I'm 48 months left on my lease.
Yeah. So let's say you got, we'll call it 36 to 48 months.
Yeah.
And you know what you want to do. Again, we're not talking about what you want to do. You've already figured out how much office space you need. Right now is a potentially good time in this market to go to your landlord and talk about what your long-term potential in your building is. So if right now you're a full floor and you know that you could be a half a floor and you got 24 months left, you might be able to go to your landlord and say, landlord, how do I save money earlier than 48 months from now or 36 months from now so I can downsize? I will pay you rents closer to what the current market is, but on a much smaller square footage. So you're saving money immediately and you're trading long-term value in that building. Some landlords will be really, really excited to have that conversation with you because, again, Matt said, value tenancy. They see that long-term value, even if you shrink, staying over the long term of your lease and potentially growing later on down the road. And you get to take advantage as a tenant of today's market conditions and the uncertainty, and maybe rents flatlining where 4 years from now, the world looks a lot different. So this is the strategy that says, can you save money today or the next year from now, even though your expiry is not for 3 or 4 years?
Yeah. So the term for that is a blend and extend, where you're blending the rates today
Blend
from
and
where you
extend.
were extending long term. That was actually, Mike, that was a very good explanation of what it was in a very simple way. It is, I would say, a little bit more convoluted from that, given you have a book value of a full floor over the next 4 years. If I need to go to a half floor over the next 10 years, well, I'm decreasing my size in half, but I'm giving 6 extra years rent. Does that equal out? It is a little bit more complicated than that. That's certainly how landlords will look at it. But to the point, there are opportunities to do that right now, particularly within some of the landlords' portfolios. What we are seeing, and it depends on the landlord, some landlords right now will not enter into a conversation to blend and extend if it means giving back space. They just full stop, do not want any space back in the buildings right now because they're not sure there's a confidence level within the market to relet that space because they can't give a timeline behind it. Generally, if a landlord says, I'm getting this space back I'll do this blend and extend with you, Mike, because I feel confident in the next 24 months, I will be able to lease that space. Right. If there's not that level of confidence, they don't want to take that space back. So it depends on the landlord and their confidence.
Depends on the landlord. Conservative landlords, and we know them, conservative landlords might say, I'm not spending money this year. I'm not taking back space this year. Like, I'm as uncertain as you are and leave me alone. And we do hear that. There's a lot of other landlords that are very creative that are going to work with you. Work with us. We're thinking long-term value here. And they see the long-term value as higher than the short-term space that you might be giving back anyway. So it's a conversation worth having with your broker and worth having with your landlord to see, is this something worth entertaining? Now, here's something, I'm not a company or an accountant, but if you're an organization that's saying, hey, look, we're subleasing space everywhere, we're going to reconfigure office, I'm going to move next year and just write off the difference in my space, and you are willing to relocate and basically write off the balance, there is an opportunity to do that. There's similar fine space today. There is also some opportunity to sublease. What we tell our tenants who are looking to sublease on a short-term basis, if you have 2 or 3 years left, is there will be more demand for short-term space, especially for those companies that are also uncertain with lease expiries. So depending on the quality of your space, it might make sense to put it on the sublease market and see what happens if you know that you can downsize and that's part of your strategy. Yep. We're being very conservative, and I'm sure you're Matt telling clients the same thing is, don't count on rent coming in for a year. It might take that long by the time a deal gets done and rent's being paid, but there will be more demand for your type of space, and it's a strategy worth considering.
Yeah, and ultimately, I mean, sometimes a lot of the goal of putting space on the sublease market is to eventually find a tenant that can then go direct with your landlord, and you can terminate off your lease, so you don't even have to be a sub-landlord.
Yeah,
ultimately, that's generally the goal. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. I think we should wrap up quickly, but where I want to kind of end the conversation is by talking about, well, why did we start having this conversation, and why did we pick this week to talk about it? One, we're actually having this conversation right now a lot with our clients, really over the last 2, 3, 4 weeks, this has been the conversation we're having more than any others, particularly over the last 5 months since COVID hit. I think the reason for that is when we're talking about deal cycles, as you and I have mentioned, at 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, people are starting to look more confidently and positively 12 months down the road, 24 months down the road. I think there's not necessarily that anyone can tell you where the end in sight is, but I think people are confidently saying, okay, there is going to be an end in sight here. And I think where this becomes a little bit problematic, or the reason we're having this conversation more frequently now, is our deal cycle will likely be longer than the end in sight. Once there's a vaccine, once people are able to start getting back to work, frankly, once schools open, could be a huge opportunity for people to start getting back to the office. But schools might also shut down within the first month. There's so much uncertainty around that.
That'll be a huge indicator. If the
Right.
kids can do it and they can stay in school and keep the numbers down, then office space becomes more of a discussion. We're not going
Yeah,
back.
potentially, right. I think what our clients are trying to do is get out, the ones that we're always looking for, the ones that are trying to get out ahead of it. So, okay, we feel like I can tell you definitively, we're negotiating a deal for Q3 of next year with a client who feels relatively confident they'll be back in the office at Q3 of next year. And if they're not back in the office of Q3 of next year, they're okay with that because they're making a long-term commitment to office space in Toronto. And that's something they feel incredibly confident about. So I think it's just, these are the conversations we're having. And again, the whole goal of this was, as we're having these conversations with our clients, we thought we'd just bring it to our networks. And that's really the one that we've been having the most over the last few months, the last few weeks.
Yeah, and there's, like I said, there's lots of opportunity if you are having conversations about your real estate. Really, the one group we didn't touch on too much, and there's not much, is if you have a longer term lease expiry. Yeah, you know what? You can put your space on the sublease market. There might be demand for it if you're patient, but there's always a conversation to be had with your landlord, with your broker, figuring out how your pieces fit and how you want to work with your long-term strategy. Your biggest challenge as a tenant is figuring that out, and we all wish we kind of knew where the world was going to figure out what your space should look like and when it should look like that. But from a market perspective, is a lot of opportunities here today, and always feel free to give one of us a call or your broker a call and figure out what makes sense.
I think that's a really strong point to end on, Mike. What we're seeing more than anything right now is the conversations of the economic value of real estate, the actual physical occupant, people in your space, their value on real estate, and then your tenancy's value to your landlord are all coming together more than we've ever seen over the last 5 to 10 years in downtown Toronto, which is really exciting. I find that incredibly exciting. I think it's going to be a really exciting fall into winter into spring. I don't know where we'll be working or where we'll be in that time. But again, at a 12,
good, right? It shuffles things around, it reconfigures what's important to us, what our needs are, and that's for office space as well. There's going to be a new normal. The new normal is going to be a shift in the right direction from where we were before.
And like we've said, I think you'll see the groups right now that are starting to actively get or at least being proactive now and saying, okay, I think we're starting to see where this is going to be. I think we see that we want our people back in the space. We might have to reconfigure. We might not. Those are the people getting out in front of it right now and looking 12 to 24 months down the road. And I think those are the ones that'll see some real value. And we're happy to either help with that or at least advance the conversation. So,
deal of the decade, Mike, right? The deal of the decade, potentially, if they're the right client.
Yeah, we were probably saying that 10 years ago. We were probably saying that 5 years ago. And we'll say it again.
It's the title of this podcast, remember, right? It's what we're going to title this one, maybe.
You know what? Hey, we've been looking for titles throughout the whole thing. So deal of the decade, again, you'll get it 8 months into the decade, 6 of which have been a global pandemic. So if you can't get the deal of the decade now, I think it's Michael's fault. Okay, that's it for us this week, guys. Thanks like always for tuning in. And yeah, please give us your feedback. We go through them all. We try to respond and we try to take your ideas and again, bring you podcasts. So until next time, thanks again.
Cheers, guys.